But I just stayed on 17 and let's talk about this. Yeah. My life was green, it's been green for a while, wasn't turning yellow or anything. Get permit, then it was chick this and she's gonna turn it to top of the
Is it your birthday? Oh, it's like the happy birthday, 20 or 21? Congrats.
I couldn't slow it down, I was going full speed on it. And I enjoyed it.
Ooh.
So it was her fault, I didn't need to take it, she did.
You get alright?
Yeah. Taking my time.
Okay. I have some texts for you guys for this class.
Tactical radiation.
This is an IAEA publication, the International Atomic Energy Agency. It is very generic and not specific to any facility or particular set of regulations. So for those of you who may want to work at an NRC regulated facility as an operator, or those of you who are hoping to work at the INL, which is a DOE regulated facility, it will be concepts that you can take to any kind of facility without being as specific. So I liked this version. Let me change my settings real quick. Okay, so Susan, Karina, and Trevor, come by my office sometime when you guys are on campus and get your copy of the book. I have copies for you guys in my office. And then,
Do we have to do attendance like we did?
yes,
Yeah.
so go ahead and do your guys' own attendance. For those of you who are online, if you'll get on Moodle and go to the little attendance widget. Let me share this so you guys can see. Right here at the top, this attendance. You guys click on that and then click here on this lecture regular class session for all students. There'll be a little arrow that looks like this. Click that and you guys should be able to mark your own attendance right here. O is for online. So if you're attending online, mark O. P is for present. And after 5 minutes, you can only mark yourself as late.
Is this 153? Yeah, 153. Yeah.
You what? Okay.
Hey, Mackenzie.
You cut out, I think, Trevor.
Oh, is there a code for this Zoom class, like this Zoom meeting? Kingston said he needed a code.
There is a password. If you go into Moodle.
Is it the 2475 word?
Let's see, right here. 206914. If you start the meeting from Moodle, though, you usually don't have to enter it.
Did they change something about like requiring passwords? Because like, okay.
Yeah. Apparently enough people were randomly showing up in Zoom classes that they put passwords on all of them. Okay, and then we're also going to need this 10 CFR 20 part 835. This is your occupational radiation protection regulations. Whether you work at a DOE or NRC facility, this is what they're going to have to put into place as part of our Code of Federal Regulations on radiological protection. And so we'll be looking at this and we'll have some quizzes from the reading. This some stuff you have to memorize and know. The other one is more of a guide. And again, for those of you who are online, stop by my office and I'll get you guys a copy of the text. Okay, so I personally thought that this looks better on the whiteboard because it's super dark and fuzzy, and then this like fabric is hard to see. You guys tell me if you think it looks better on the whiteboard.
I'd say it's about the same, but, it looks a bit better. I like
Yeah,
it.
we will look at it.
It's less fuzzy.
Yeah, there's a little holder. It was hanging over that little bracket.
Like his energy there, but it's
Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna talk about the syllabus a little bit. You guys are welcome to turn these front lights off. The other class that's in here does that. They think it helps. It's not as nice as our 203 classroom for sure.
Why does it switch classrooms?
Because just the way other classes are scheduled, somebody needed a longer section of time, and the 203 classroom was available because we don't have a class right after this. But apparently there's a class after that in this classroom. So I just told Gail it was fine. I didn't care if we moved to make it easier on her to schedule everybody. Because EdTech in general has less classrooms than we should for a department our size. So they get super closely packed. Okay. So I know a couple of you were not in class for just a few minutes this morning when we talked about the schedule. So I'm just going to reiterate that. Every Tuesday from noon to 12:50 in this classroom, we'll have our lecture. The Tuesday and Thursday morning sections from 9 to 10:50 are lab. And you guys are split into groups for lab. If you have any questions about what group you're in, if you go here to attendance and you go into the group for Tuesday, only the people in the Tuesday lab group are on that attendance. So Darren, Gage, Brooke, Zach, and Michael are our Tuesday lab group. And then if you go in here and you look for Thursday, Kingston, Trevor, Karina, Bernice, and Susan are our Thursday lab group. So you guys do not need to attend Tuesday lab, but Thursdays at 9 a.m., you do need to be in the RFC lab in the basement, our Rad lab. Does everybody understand what the meeting times are? Everybody online? Is that clear? Okay, thank you, Serena.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay. I have an office in room 205 of EdTech. I think just about everybody has been there before and should know where it is. Maybe you haven't. Do you know where the office building for EdTech or the office is for EdTech? Okay, so this building right next to us, if you go up to this second floor and go all the way to the end of the hall, I'm the last door on the right. I have office hours basically every afternoon and Monday morning. So Monday 9 to 11:30 and then 2 to 3, Tuesday 1 to 3, Wednesday 2 to 3, and Thursday 11 to 3. I am not around Friday afternoons. I run a food pantry in Chubbuck, and as soon as class is done at noon, I go there. So that's the only time you won't be able to find me. I also discovered last semester that I'm really, really bad at grading stuff when I have people coming into my office and interrupting me. So I will be available in office hours until 3, and then I'm going to leave and I'm going to go home to do grading and prep. So you won't see me at the very end of the day. I know a lot of the other EzTech staff are around until 5, so that's just something a little bit different I'm doing. So I want you guys to be aware I won't be there quite as late as everyone else because I can't grade when I'm getting interrupted. I just discovered it about myself. So anytime I'm in my office, you guys are welcome to come stop by, ask questions about this class, ask questions about your other classes, registering for next semester, job applications, internship applications, whatever. I'm always available in my office. Okay, this is a required course for EzTech graduation. So those of you who are in the EzTech program, you must get a C- in this class. And there's no required textbooks that you have to purchase, but I did print off those 2 resources for you guys that we'll be using. Okay. The modesty close. I know that some of you did not respond to my email, so just so you're aware, we're going to practice implementing a clean line. So when we do our labs after this week, when we have to start dressing out, there's a set of bathrooms right outside the back door of our lab area, and those bathrooms have lockers. So at the start of lab, you will go in, you will leave all of your personal items, your backpacks, cell phones, clothing, all of it will be left in those lockers, and you will put on a pair of modesty clothes, which are basically scrubs. The ones I ordered off Amazon for us are like 1,000 times better than the ones I ever got at the INL, in that they're not 10 years old and have been used by thousands of sweaty bodies. They're going to be new to you. If you didn't respond to my email during the break asking for your size, I can still order you a set of modesty clothes, but they will probably not be here in time for our first set of labs. So you need to have something like a t-shirt and a set of gym shorts, or leggings and a t-shirt that you can put in that locker and have be your modesty clothes until the scrubs arrive. So there were a few of you who never responded. So if you still want, at no charge to you, a set of modesty clothes, send me an email with your size, and they're just unisex sizes, and I will order some. But have something for next week as we start dressing out. Yeah.
Do we need to bring a specific notebook and things into the lab, or will we need anything at all to bring in there?
Yes, so you can bring writing instrument and notes. I know you use your tablet a lot, and that's acceptable. And you guys can use your reference books here. So those can come in. They will not go in the radiological area, but they can come in for our briefing. And that would also be similar at the INL. Most of the time, places don't allow electronic devices. So you'd have a paper notebook, but taking notes during briefings is completely acceptable. In fact, it is encouraged. So the same will hold true in our class. It's just personal items, and a lot of times that's going to include jewelry. So just as a practice, small stud earrings, fine. Dangling earrings, not. So, all you guys with your pierced ears and your earrings that hang down, don't wear those into a lab. And then you'll need closed-toed, sturdy leather shoes that come above the ankle. I'm not going to be super rigid about this if you don't already own something that's a work boot. I'm not going to make you go spend money to buy one. We will accept tennis shoes, but nothing open-toed. And if you have work boots, I would get in the practice of wearing those and putting your PPE on and off with the shoes you plan to work in, because it is a challenge to get it over the heel of some boots. And you might discover, hey, I really like this set of boots, but I do not like wearing it with PPE. I'm going to look at getting myself something different. And that would be very valuable for you to try out in this class, is getting comfortable with your PPE. Okay, electronic devices. Whatever you guys are going to use to record your attendance, take notes on, look at the slides on, pull up the documents off Moodle, it's totally fine. If a student complains that you have something that's not class related up and it's distracting, or I notice that you have something not class related up on your electronic device, I will take away your attendance for that day. If you're not participating in the class and paying attention because you're distracted by your electronic device, my view is you're not present for class. So whatever you want to use, whatever tool helps you access our resources, that's all fine. If you're not participating in class because of it, I'll just count you as absent. If you have a disability, work with disability services early in the semester and get the accommodations. Even if you choose not to use them, that's fine. But if later in the semester you have a problem, like you have to change medication or your medication isn't available, or you have a bunch of assignments due at once and you're struggling because of reading comprehension, you at least have the ability to then quickly go put in an accommodation to help you be successful. So if you think that you need some additional help because of a learning disability or physical disability, work with disability services early, because I can't just make exceptions for students without a reason, right? If you have a disability waiver and you're like, hey, I don't need the full accommodation, but I just need a little more time or a little more tutoring, we can help you out. You guys also have a student handbook that has the ISU code of conduct and it has their code of ethics and academic dishonesty. We're entering a field where your voluntary compliance with doing the right thing and following the regulations is entirely necessary. So I have a very zero tolerance policy on academic dishonesty. If I find out that you guys cheat on something, I will do my best to make sure that you don't graduate and work in this field. Because that's not the kind of students we want coming out of this program, right? We all want to be proud of who this program graduates. And know that when people hire other students associated with this degree, they're giving a good reputation for you when you go to get hired, and you're doing the same for future students. I did notice a little struggle with some students last semester. Sometimes I do not explicitly say in my rubrics that you need to cite sources, because to me that's a given. We're in a technical field. When other people have done work and we reference that work, we cite that source. To not do so is plagiarism. So even if I don't explicitly say in the rubric that you need to cite your sources, you guys should know you always cite your sources. So if you have a lab report where you look something up and you reference that information, especially if you take numbers or a quote from that source, make sure you're citing that source. And if you have any question about you should be or not citing something, feel free to ask me. I'll definitely help you. But make sure we're citing our sources on any written submissions. Okay, so our topics are set out. We have a few more lectures than we do labs, but we're going to be doing a little bit of review of radiation basics. For everyone who took the 151 class for me, I know for sure it's review. I'm going to assume it's review for you as well, Gage. You took 151 with Mike? Yeah. And what year are you in the nuclear program? Your second year? So have you had a fundamentals of radiation type class? No? Okay. All right. So this will be new for you. But that's good. We'll make sure Gage and Bernice are on the same page with everybody and everybody remembers stuff we did before the break. We're going to talk about radioactive materials and dose. We're going to talk about biological effects of radiation exposure and dosimetry, how we monitor for that exposure, postings, contamination control, procedures and RWPs and performance of work, and how to read an RWP before you go into a radiation area. We will be using INL's rad work laboratory procedures and their RWPs. But for those of you who maybe are interested in working in a commercial nuclear plant or someplace that's not the INL, it'll be very, very similar. INL is just kind enough to give us their actual documents so we can look at real workplace examples. We'll look at survey techniques, radiological emergency response, and then we'll talk about records and occupational exposure. As we're talking about these topics in the lecture, we're going to be incorporating those topics in the lab. We're going to look at inspecting and donning our PPE. We're going to be talking about doffing PPE and then personal frisking. So we're going to break those down. When we did this, for those of you who were in 151 with me in lab, we skipped a lot of the details. You guys got the gross introduction to what we do. We're going to add a lot of those details. For those of you who haven't done it before, you guys will get to start from the very basics with all of the details in place, and you'll get to do this basically every single lab. Be ready for the fact that we will be putting on PPE basically every lab. When we do our environmental surveys, we're going to participate in something called Rad Responder Week. Rad Responder is an app for radiological emergency responders. So it's very commonly used by like hazmat teams at fire stations. And then of course the Department of Energy has something called the RAP team, which is the Radiological Assistance Program. They clean up radiological spills, and they are to detect and prevent RDDs, so radiological dispersal devices, so basically bombs with radiation in them. The Civil Engineering Department has been working with a bunch of first responders, and they've created a first responder exercise area down by the tracks in the old Army Reserve building, and then up on the hill by the physics center. We're going to do an environmental characterization of that facility for them. So you guys are going to go through and you're going to get the background readings, and you're going to look for any hot spots that are naturally existing. So then when they come and they put radiological sources out and they tell the first responders, hey, take your instruments and find the bomb that the terrorist hid, right, their mock bomb, they're going to know already what the background is. So the trainers can set those in good areas and know what might cause the students issues with the background radiation. So we're going to do that for the Civil Engineering Department and for Rad Responder Week. We're going to put our data in Rad Responder so that background data is actually saved in case there's ever a radiological incident here in Pocatello. We've got some background info. So as part of that, you guys will all need to register for a Rad Responder account. And I'll put the details on how to do that in Moodle, but be aware it's an app you put on your phone. Then we're going to talk about some glove box techniques and glove box change outs. I have a whole bunch of instruments coming to put inside that glove box, and you guys are going to put on the lead line gloves, which make your finger mobility 0. And you're going to take little tiny measurements of fluids and prepare sample bottles, and we're going to see how much you spill. might have some sort of funny award for whoever spills the least. Then we're going to talk about conduct of operations in radiological control areas. We'll have some remote communications. We'll practice using our radios to communicate information from people who are outside the rad area to people who are in. We'll look at signing on to RWPs and using and creating survey maps and reading and understanding radiological postings. So we'll incorporate all of those into our labs. What you're graded on in this course? Attendance, Moodle assignments and quizzes are each 10%. So there are some reading comprehension quizzes in Moodle. I think the first one is due this week, right here on this radiation types. It opens on Thursday and it's due next Tuesday. A lot of the quizzes are due after we start talking about one topic, before we start talking about another. So there's a little bit of a short turnaround because I want you guys to hear the topics in lecture, practice them in lab, and answer questions on your comprehension of the quiz. So if you go through and you're like, there's an unlimited amount of takes that you can do, right? So if you go through and you got it done on time, but you're like, oh, I was busy this weekend and I didn't answer it as many times as I wanted to, I am willing to give some, to open these up for a little bit more, but I do want everyone to be getting at least one attempt done in that time frame so that you're reinforcing the material we're covering and it's a good learning tool for you. Does that make sense, the purpose I have for the quizzes for you? Okay. A lot of what we're going to be discussing in the lecture, I don't want to sit and talk to you guys a ton. I want you guys to have read the material and we're going to discuss. And where there are maybe weaknesses, I'll pull up a PowerPoint, I'll pull up something to kind of show you, hey, this is what we need to cover. So we'll, kind of make an exception for this week because it's our first class. But in general, it says what it is that you should read or watch before our lecture. And then we're going to check understanding and discuss the concepts together in class, right? And then I have some lecture materials taken from that we can go over in more detail, what you maybe need to supplement your understanding from your reading, okay? But I want this to be very much discussion driven by you guys rather than me talking at you. I talked at you a lot for 151. You got a broad introduction. Now you guys need to start taking responsibility for understanding these things in the same way that you're going to be responsible for your continuing training in the workplace. Does that make sense? So each week, I try to tell you which piece of material you do need to read before, right? So these 3 PDFs before our lecture on Tuesday, here, this document, and watch those videos, right, before our lecture. Okay? Not every single document do I need you to read as if I'm going to give you a test on Tuesday. You can skim some of this, right? Because I know that's a lot of preparation between Tuesday to Tuesday. But have looked at it. Be ready to kind of discuss or ask questions about some stuff you were confused on. Standard ISU grading scale for this class. You do need a C- if you are graduating as tech. Any questions on the syllabus or course structure so far? Yeah, Michael.
Can I ask about 152? I did get moved to Friday though.
Yes. So 152 will be on Friday, even though the registrar says it's on Thursday. We traditionally put that class on Friday, and you guys want it to be on Friday because Friday is the off day for the INL. So it's when INL speakers can come.
Is that 10, right?
Yes, at 10 on Friday. So I think Christy will be in the classroom Thursday just to make sure nobody shows up and sits there.
Oh, is that the NRC one that you're talking about? Or the other
No,
one?
that's the
Oh,
nuclear
okay.
careers class that Christy's teaching this semester. The NRC class is at 11 on Fridays. Okay, any questions online about the syllabus or what we've covered so far?
Nope.
Okay. All right. I'm going to start by showing us these videos. Sorry. This video.
Which light turns off the front one? Is it black?
I don't know which is which. Oh, it looks like
I
it's
think it goes in order, coordinated. Yeah, it goes in order.
okay.
I think there's enough light where we.
Okay.
Yeah. Almost.
Let me share the sound with the people online real quick. Okay, can you guys online see that video?
I can.
Okay, let me know if you can't hear it. There is sound.
Radiation can be a scary word for a lot of people. But just what is radiation exactly? I mean, you probably know that it's responsible for such 1950s monster movies like Godzilla, but that doesn't tell us much. Radiation, in the sense that we normally mean the word, was discovered in 1896 by Henri Becquerel when he discovered that uranium could fog a piece of film. But even that definition of radiation is incomplete. So what is radiation exactly? Radiation is the emission of energy by a substance. There are lots of kinds of radiation. There is electromagnetic radiation and nuclear radiation. Electromagnetic radiation encompasses such things as radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet light, X-rays, and gamma rays. These are all pretty familiar and aren't what we normally mean when we talk about radiation. I mean, microwaves can cook things, and ultraviolet can give you a sunburn. So it's not like electromagnetic radiation can't be dangerous, but it's generally not what people mean when they talk about radiation. Actually, gamma radiation is an example of that kind of radiation, but we'll return to that in a bit. When people talk about radiation, they mostly mean nuclear radiation, which is when subatomic particles are emitted from the nucleus of atoms. I should also say that nuclear radiation is sometimes called ionizing radiation, as it's energetic enough to knock electrons off atoms. But I'll call it nuclear radiation to remind you of the radiation's origin. And there isn't just one kind of nuclear radiation. There are at least 4 different kinds. There's alpha radiation, beta radiation, gamma radiation, and neutron radiation. Each of these types of radiation have different characteristics. Alpha radiation is when an atomic nucleus shoots out an alpha particle, which consists of 2 protons and 2 neutrons. If you dust off your chemical knowledge, you'll recall that the nucleus of a helium atom contains 2 protons and neutrons, so alpha radiation is when a radioactive element shoots out a helium atom minus the electrons. Beta radiation is caused when an atomic nucleus shoots out an electron. We could call it electron radiation, but the name was invented before we identified the emitted particle as an electron. It generally occurs when a neutron in an atomic nucleus turns into a proton and an electron. The proton is kept inside the nucleus and the electron escapes. Gamma radiation is when an extremely high energy photon escapes the nucleus. In a sense, this isn't much different than a nucleus emitting ordinary light, but the much higher energy involved means that the gamma ray can damage surrounding material. Gamma rays are often used in comic books to give superpowers to unsuspecting spectators. By the way, X-rays are similar to gamma radiation in many ways, but less energetic. They're like gamma radiation's younger and less successful sibling. And then there is neutron radiation, which is just the emission of a neutron. In a sense, this is the most dangerous type of radiation, but as we will see, that's a subjective statement. So these are the different kinds of radiation that one encounters in nuclear physics. But as we will see, they have radically different properties. This isn't a radiation safety video, but it's important to know, at least broadly, what you need to do to be safe around radiation. Perhaps obviously, the easiest thing to do is just get very far away from it. Just like a fire seems cooler the further you get from it, distance is the easiest way to reduce your exposure to radiation. However, that's not always possible. We live in a radioactive world. Bananas are radioactive, as are Brazil nuts. Heck, you are radioactive. I made another video discussing levels of radioactivity, and if you watch that, you'll understand that low levels of radioactivity are not inherently dangerous. But there are things you might encounter that are more dangerous. Things like dental x-rays, for example. Now, don't worry about dental x-rays. They give you a very low dose, and they're definitely worth having. But if you're, for an example, a dental hygienist, you might encounter lots of x-rays and want to protect yourself. So it's important to know about the ways in which you can shield yourself from various kinds of radiation. Alpha radiation consists of heavy and slowly moving particles with a lot of electrical charge. These properties combine to make them easy to stop. You can stop alpha particles using a single sheet of paper. Here, I'll show you. Here is a sample that emits alpha particles in a Geiger counter. The paper stops the radiation. Beta radiation consists of light and fast-moving particles with electric charge. This means that they can be stopped by reasonably thin plates of material. For instance, we see here that they can be stopped by a thin metal plate. Gamma radiation consists of fast-moving particles with no electric charge. This means they emit no electric fields to interact with matter. They are therefore much harder to stop. To stop gamma rays, you need a heftier chunk of dense material like lead. This is also true for X-rays, which is why they put a lead apron on you when you're getting dental X-rays. Neutron radiation consists of pretty heavy particles with no electric charge. Since they don't interact with atomic electrons, they can travel long distances, say hundreds or even thousands of meters in air. The way to slow them down is not so intuitive. You have to use something with a lot of hydrogen in it, like water or plastic. The neutrons hit the protons in the hydrogen nuclei and knock them out. This stops the neutrons, and then the charged protons are stopped quickly, much like alpha particles are. By the way, given the clicking noises you heard, you might be wondering if the technician doing the demos here was in any danger. The answer is no. The radioactive sources we used were real, but they were weak. This diagram shows you roughly how to shield the various kinds of radiation. It summarizes what I just said. So I've told you about how to protect yourself from radiation, distance and shielding. And for shielding, I've told you what works for what kinds of radiation. But what if you can't move away or get shielding? What impact do these types of radiation have on human tissues? This is kind of interesting. It turns out that the different types of radiation have distinctly different consequences in terms of biological damage. In order to figure this out, scientists took different kinds of radiation and aimed them at various kinds of tissue and saw how much biological damage occurred. They then came up with a number that would account for the differing amounts of damage observed. This number is called a quality factor, or just Q. If Q is 1, that means there's no adjustment. If Q is greater than 1, that means that this particular kind of radiation is biologically more dangerous than other types of radiation. So we see here a chart that shows the Q factor for different kinds of radiation. We see that gamma and beta radiation and X-rays have a Q factor of 1, which means that they don't have an enhanced damage capability. But slow neutrons have a Q of 5, which means that for the same amount of absorbed radiation, more biological damage occurs. Fast neutrons have a Q of 10, and alpha particles have a Q of 20, which means that they do more biological damage than other kinds of radiation. That last one is kind of weird. I mean, alpha particles are easy to stop, but do more damage in living tissues. But if you think about it, this makes sense. When an alpha particle stops, it stops hard, and it deposits all of its energy in one place. This means when it hits a cell, the local damage is extensive. This is especially true if you're unlucky enough to inhale alpha-emitting radioactive dust. That's extremely dangerous. So I hope that this video kind of gives you an idea of the diversity of possible kinds of radiation. I mean, there isn't a single kind, and that means that if you want to understand radiation and how to react in a certain situation, you really do need to become informed. However, that does take work because, in the end, understanding radiation is like your Facebook status when you're deciding if you want to get back together with your ex. It's complicated.
I really like that that guy is so obviously a nerd and he's so amused by his dad jokes.
Where do you see nuclear radiation? Or
Pretty-
neutron- that's what I meant, neutron.
Pretty much only in fission.
Okay.
Neutrons are released during fission and they're a significant hazard at reactors and nowhere else. Yes, because that's a tremendous amount of fission. It's an out of control reactor, right?
Isn't that what causes most damage is the radiation after a bomb?
It depends by what you mean by most. Because initially, the most damage is definitely from the actual explosion and the amount of heat and energy that's released. And then after that, the lingering effects, the radiation, can be from a lot of different sources, but yeah. The neutron dose is definitely significant in its damage to your tissue. Okay, so just briefly to recap, he talked about ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, right? He called it nuclear radiation. Unlike him, I prefer ionizing and non-ionizing, but saying nuclear radiation is not incorrect. Non-ionizing radiation we use all the time. We accept that it's there, and he pointed out the examples of like sunburn, right? So it can be dangerous. Thermal radiation, microwave, visible light is radiation. So the colors coming off of our clothing, for example, that's radiation from light coming at you. Ionizing radiation is our alpha, beta, gamma, X-rays, neutrons, and over here we also have UV. So when we get that sunburn, it is actually a type of ionizing radiation because it can damage human cells. When we look at an electromagnetic spectrum, we're going to have our non-ionizing and our ionizing. on the same spectrum, right? All of those energy as waves, they're all part of the same system, okay? Our wavelength is longer and our frequency is less for non-ionizing radiation. We have a shorter wavelength and a higher frequency as we get towards ionizing radiation. This is what allows ionizing radiation to do damage to physical structures and tissues. So we have extremely low frequency sources, AC power, or CRT monitors. I don't know if any of you guys have, how much you like history. I really like history. One thing I find fascinating is humans are really, really bad at risk evaluation and risk communication. It is not a natural thing to us. So one of the things I like to do is find in libraries or online and read about the various panic-inducing inventions that have come out over time, like TVs, and then cell phones in the 80s. And if you look at some of the advertising that was done, one of the big things is, oh no, TVs and then the CRT computer monitors emit radiation. They're going to burn your eyeballs up if you sit and use them. Did any of you guys ever as a kid, I don't know if any of you are old enough for this, have your parents yell at you, don't sit so close to TV, it's going to burn your eyes? Okay, so when TVs and the tube technology in TVs and the old CRT monitors first came out, everybody was freaking out about this non-ionizing radiation that was emitted by them. And that was literally what they thought. You're going to radiate your eyeballs and you're going to go blind. And then cell phones, when they became popular, everyone thought you were irradiating your brain when you held your cell phone up. And so there was a big push not to talk on your cell phone as long as you might have your handheld home phone. So just history. It is actually radiation. There is sort of a basis for it, but non-ionizing radiation doesn't damage the tissue. Yeah, Michael.
What does it mean by earth and subways? Just natural vibrations?
Yeah, there's a certain amount of geomagnetic radiation that comes out of the earth, and when you're in the subway, you're in that earth, and you get that. Because the core of the earth produces magnetism, right? That's why our compasses work. So we get geomagnetic radio waves.
And it's the same if you were flying as well. Is that radiation the same?
That's going to be a lot more cosmic radiation, which is actually gamma radiation and UV, but it is still naturally occurring. Wi-Fi. So for those of you who are wondering, 5G did give us coronavirus. Not actually. But this is why some of those theories exist, right? Because we are talking about radiation. The difference is ionizing and non-ionizing. They're two different things. That nuclear radiation, that ionizing radiation, that is what's capable of damaging humans. It's also very powerful when we harness it, right? That's how we get x-rays, how we get medical isotopes, how we fight cancer, right? The reason we can fight cancer with radiation is because radiation destroys tissue. The first tissue it destroys is the tissue that is multiplying the fastest. Cancer tumors multiply faster than your normal tissue. Therefore, it absorbs more radiation. Therefore, we can kill it. Okay. There's lots of sources of naturally occurring radioactive material, NORM, which we're going to talk about next week in our lecture. There's lots of sources of radiation dose that occur naturally. X-ray machines, so every time you get a medical X-ray, you're getting exposed to radiation. There's radionuclides in the Earth's crust. Those of you who did the lab this morning know that we looked at a whole bunch of rocks that I had various people pick up in the Rockies and the mountains in New Mexico. Those of you who are going to do your lab on Thursday, we're going to look at a lot of radioactive rocks. It just exists. The sun, cosmic X-rays, gamma rays, and UV all come from the sun, right? Brick buildings. When we do some of our environmental surveying and we walk around ISU a little bit, you take your detectors up to a brick building, you're going to get more radiation than if you go to a wood-sided building. So The difference between like the library and that church right next to the library will be a huge difference in radiation because bricks have some of this radionuclides from their crust in their structure. They're more radioactive. Here in Idaho, we have a big problem with radon. And so if you have lived in a basement for an extended period of time, like through high school in Idaho, you have probably doubled your background exposure to radiation from people who haven't lived in a basement. And then some other radiation sources.
Would the background exposure that you get if you lived in the basement, like if you were working at INL or something, would they factor that into like your exposure there?
Nope. They actually don't care about what you get in your normal life at all. They don't care when you fly. Because a flight from LA to New York is more radiation than you typically get working at the INO. Those of us who went to Chernobyl, we all got more than that at Chernobyl. But they don't care about if you take a flight. The only time they need you to report any radiation exposure to them is if it was occupational. So if you were monitored for it. So those of you who did go on that trip to Chernobyl, you're going to need to tell your employer when you get there that you have a record from previous exposure. And then there are certain medical treatments where you remain radioactive after the treatment, and you will set off friskers and portal monitors. And they need to know about that because they don't want to have to say you set it off and we had to go count you because of something that happened in the workplace. It's you set it off because of your medical isotope and it had nothing to do with work. So like the blood tracers for people who are having heart issues, those can be a big deal for occupational workers. Okay. I like this image because it gives you a pretty good view of all the different kinds of cosmic radiation. So you can get cosmic rays that have alpha. You can get protons from the solar flares, and then you can get protons and electrons that get trapped in our magnetic field as they try to enter the atmosphere, and you can get gamma rays in on this ratio. All the different types of solar radiation we can get. Terrestrial radiation, it comes from the ground. This is a piece of uranium ore. It'll look very, very like something you'll see in lab, or did see in lab. Man-made radiation is when we start having our medical, right? So this might be something you're exposed to non-occupationally, but it's still going to make your annual dose, be an annual dose contributor, okay? Nuclear power plants are going to produce all four types of our nuclear radiation, the main concerning types of ionizing radiation. Medical facilities, fuel storage facilities, fuel enrichment facilities, all of our front end of the nuclear fuel cycle facilities can also produce all of these. Neutrons are going to be unique from facilities that have fission, or as Michael pointed out, weapons. Typically, we're going to see uranium-235, which is our fuel, plutonium-239, which is typically made when we fission, and cesium and iodine, which are fission products. And then our major environmental concerns, because they're either wind or water soluble, and so they can move throughout the environment if you haven't accidentally released radiological material. Okay, so what's important? Knowing the difference between ionizing and non-radiation, ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. Know a couple of examples. Be familiar with that image that shows our wavelength change and the types, some general ranges. And then under ionizing, know about alpha, beta, gamma, and neutron. Any questions? Okay. There is on Moodle a copy of that lecture if you guys want to look at it. There's a link to this Health Physics Society details on alpha, beta, and gamma. These are some good facts to know, and some information that might be helpful in figuring out how we're going to determine what types of radiation is being emitted from the different sources in our lab on Thursday. Those of you who are here today for lab, I told you, reading ahead will help you with labs. This is the kind of information that you're going to get, right? Knowing how far to hold stuff, how our GM detects stuff. So, any questions? Okay, then I'll see lab group 2 on Thursday morning.